Hey everybody, welcome back. Today's video is a little bit different. I want to spend this video talking about one of my favorite books of all time, if not my favorite book of all time, The Little Prince. For those of you who don't know it, The Little Prince was written by Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, and it's one of the best-selling books of all time. I've actually still got the copy that was read to me when I was a kid. You can see it's all torn up from how much I read it, and I pored over this book. It's one of the few books I've read in both English and French. It's a book I come back to and reread all of the time because I always get something more from it. I always get something new, find something new in the pages. The first lesson is hold on to your creativity. That's the first thing that this book taught me. In the story, it's illustrated by really the opening pages of the book where the author and the author character, who we can assume to be Antoine de Saint-Exupéry himself, draws an illustration here. And the story goes, as he tells it, that all the adults in the world would mistake it for a hat or see it, as a fine drawing of a hat, but not a scary image, because Antoine, he himself, the author character, always saw it as a very scary image, because to him, what he had actually drawn was a snake that had swallowed an elephant. Now, this theme, this idea is illustrated not only in the opening pages, but it recurs throughout the story in different forms. And really, in those different times, it becomes a message, a lesson about holding on to the things that matter to you. Creativity just happened to be one of those things for him, especially when the world that you're in, the life that you're living, can be dark and hard. The Little Prince is, by many accounts, a pretty somber story. There are many sad moments littered throughout it. However, it is still, to me at least, a very uplifting tale. And I think that's particularly notable because of the difficulties that Saint-Exupéry had in his own life. By the time he was 17, his dad had already died, as had his younger brother, leaving him the only remaining male member of his family. In the book, the Little Prince, on his journey from his home planet to Earth, encounters a lot of people who are very absorbed in the things that they do. Men who have status, have power, have accomplished or are doing the things that they know how to do, sometimes the only thing that they know how to do, or who only seek to be admired. And ultimately, everything they've done, all that they've accomplished, rings hollow. It's empty. The idea, I think, that goes along with that is that it's kind of meaningless to live only for yourself. Obviously, it's important to take care of yourself as your foundation, but true meaning only comes from bringing light into other people's lives. At least that's the lesson that I've taken from the book. If you have this thing that you want to protect, why not use this gift that you have to instead bring light into other people's lives? If you're going to go through the effort of really sustaining this part of yourself, then share it. Share it positively with the people around you, which today you can reach anyone in the world, anyone who might need to hear what you have to say, whether you say it through a movie, through a painting, or through a song. In dark times, this is even more true. Saint-Exupéry grew up during the World War era, and he even served during World War II. I think everyone can agree that that is one of the darkest times in our planet's history. And in that darkest of time, he found it within himself to put forward quite a lot of light, a book that's now gone on to help millions and millions of people. On ne voit bien qu'avec le cœur. L'essentiel est invisible aux yeux. That's the French version. In English, that's one sees clearly only with the heart. What is essential is invisible to the eyes. When the aviator and the Little Prince first meet, they have kind of a strange encounter where the Little Prince asks the author character, the aviator, to draw him a sheep. But each of the sheep are wrong. They're not right in different ways. And as the man continues to draw, he gets frustrated. And in the end, he draws this box. And he draws it just like that, and the Little Prince looks at it for a moment and then says, "It's perfect. That's just the sheep I wanted. The idea that goes along with this, even though the man is surprised by the little prince's reaction, is that if you look with your eyes, you just see the box. But if you look with your heart, you see the sheep inside. And really what that means is it's about the way that you make decisions and the ways that you interact with people, the way that you interact with the world, really, in general. Saint-Exupéry was someone who cheated a lot, was filled with doubts around his own life and his love life. He was not always the most secure person. There was a Salvadorian woman that he was with for some time, a woman named Consuelo Sunson. Consuelo Sunson. And their relationship was not always the easiest. She had been divorced multiple times, and she could have been described to be prickly, like the rose in the story. Again, we'll dive more into this later. But in their relationship, there's one notable thing that the little prince says, which echoes, allegedly, some of the things that Saint-Exupéry would have said about Consuelo himself. The little prince says, "I should have judged her by her acts and not by her words," speaking of the rose, or of Consuelo. He says, "I should have guessed at the tenderness behind her poor ruses." Like I said, Saint-Exupéry's life was very pained. His relationships taxed him, and whether he did not engage with them well, they were just very difficult for him. He obviously saw a very hard life, led a very difficult life, and they were filled with these personal difficulties as well. And I think whether you're dealing with romantic love or the platonic kind between friends or between family, this is really important to maintain and to remember. Love is in many ways not just hard on its own, but hard because it is a responsibility, one that you assume. And Antoine de Saint-Exupéry in the story writes, "You are responsible forever for what you have tamed." Because that comes from the story about the prince's relationship with the fox that he encounters. Many people ascribe this to relationships with pets. Obviously, in taking on a pet, you are responsible for them. And I've always been a pet lover. I've had pets. I lost one recently. That's been very important to me, and it's driven a lot of the way my life has been organized and a lot of the way that I've lived my life since coming to understand this message, this lesson from the book. But there's more to it than that. You're obviously not taming your friends, but this kind of mutual relationship, if you are friends with someone, if you are in a relationship with someone, I see it as a responsibility to be there for them when you can, to be there for them and try to be there for them even when it might not be the most convenient. Obviously, you need to set yourself up as a foundation, but these relationships matter and have meaning because of the weight that we put into them, because of the effort that we put into them, and sometimes because of what we sacrifice for them to endure and flourish. Ultimately, if that's what relationships are all about, if that's what love is about, then why should we bother doing it? I think that's a question that the author struggled with a lot, but he also answers it, or at least puts forward a possible answer in this book, and that's really the fifth lesson. As hard as love is, I think Antoine de Saint-Exupéry also argues that it's worth it. To accept happiness is to accept the risk of sadness, of loss. To love someone is to put a part of yourself, I think, out there that you know will be lost potentially if that relationship is sundered or the person is taken away, whether it's unexpected or not. And that's hard. That is a vulnerable, difficult, painful thing to do. All the stories in The Little Prince deal with this. The stories with the fox, with the rose, and ultimately between the author character and between the Little Prince himself, when the Little Prince does, spoiler, ultimately leave and go back home. When he disappears again, well, what happens is the author character is left with that sense of loss. However, what you lose is a lot. You lose your future together, but you don't lose all the time that you've spent together. And I think the conclusion that Saint-Exupéry comes to, a conclusion which I think is a really healthy one and an important one to keep in mind when you are dealing with loss and dealing with these kinds of sad feelings is that for all the pain you feel, the love that you've had is worth it. The time that you did spend together, the good moments and the things that you've shared, all those memories, all the ways that they've changed you, that you've changed them, all the things that you've experienced together, those, they don't go away. They don't go away. They stay and linger and continue to grow and influence you even long after that person is gone. You can't go through life closing yourself off to these connections simply because you're afraid of the pain that you might feel. It's a subtle theme, a subtle undercurrent throughout The Little Prince. And clearly, I think it shows that in Saint-Exupéry's life, he felt this loss all the time. From his early life with his family to ultimately the romantic relationships he had and failed, and even to his eventual disappearance in those last moments, knowing everything that he was likely losing and leaving behind. I think we can assume that Antoine de Saint-Exupéry was someone very familiar with loss and those feelings. When the prince leaves his home planet after being spurned by the rose that he loves and so cares for and has had this tumultuous relationship with, the rose denies itself, saying it doesn't need the prince, she doesn't need the prince, and so the prince should just go. But clearly that causes them both pain. By the end of the story, that is obvious. It has not helped either of them. Instead, it's just caused them both more pain than they would have had otherwise, because they couldn't accept the truth that they felt. They were unwilling to make themselves more vulnerable. They were unwilling to share it with each other. And by failing to share their true feelings, they did themselves and did each other a massive disservice. And ultimately, that's true for all of the lessons in this book, and it's true for us too. If you have and maintain this gift that you want to use for others, but you ultimately never share it, you never share it truthfully, you never share it to the utmost of your vulnerability, to the utmost of what you know to be true for yourself, you're not going to connect with people the way that you could otherwise. If you don't share those things, if you don't allow yourself to be vulnerable, not only are you going to be causing yourself pain, but you'll also be causing pain to other people who you could potentially be helping. But by holding back, you're preventing them from hearing what they need to hear, or seeing what they need to see, or reading that story they need to read. I think we should all learn from Saint-Exupéry's example and write our hearts out, wear them on our sleeves, be willing to put ourselves out there entirely. All his metaphors are really thinly veiled, and ultimately now his whole life has been somewhat unearthed, and it's clear where it ties into his experiences. And I think that only makes them more valuable, more relatable, more honest and sincere, and allows us to take more away from them. It doesn't undercut or undermine anything that he's done, anything that he's written. It just substantiates and makes it more impactful and more meaningful for us, for the reader, as we absorb these lessons through the story of the book. That's all the lessons from The Little Prince that I feel I can truly and honestly share, that I've really tried to integrate into my own life and that have meaningfully impacted me. I think it's a reminder to be the kind of person that this world needs, a person of integrity who protects what they find special about themselves, but uses that gift to bring light into the world and works as hard as possible to share that light as far and as wide as they can, and is willing to be vulnerable in doing so. Alright, that's an intense, kind of different video for today, sharing my favorite book of all time. Hopefully you did get something from it, and that's going to be it for this week. I'm making a new video every Friday, trying to make this work and connect with people out there. So if you want to follow along, make sure you subscribe. I'm making videos about my writing, about Dungeons & Dragons. I might make video about other books that I love that have impacted me this way. And I'll see you next Friday. Thanks for watching.